the feedback that I'm getting, both as a practitioner and of sales coaching and as part of my role in terms of being a doctoral candidate, studying and focusing on sales coaching and the realities of sales coaching, is that there is a lot of stress out there in the market, and that it's impacting the performance of sales people, it's impacting the mental health of those salespeople, and it's impacting the mental health of the sales managers who have to take care of them and manage them. And more sales managers are coming to me and saying, listen, I feel like I'm more like a shrink or a psychologist than a manager at the moment. What do I do? How do I handle this stuff? And the data's coming in, and the data's supporting this. Now, I'm always wary of data in the open market because people tend to create data that suits what they're trying to sell. But a source I do like is the Sales Health Alliance over in the US. Now, last year's report, they haven't done one this year yet, but showed that 43% of people in sales are struggling with their mental health. They are reporting that their mental health is either poor or fair. Now, in the same research, 67% of those salespeople were saying that they are either at burnout or rapidly approaching burnout. And obviously with burnout, there's some pretty dramatic impacts on performance. And this is very much related to performance, because a really interesting thing for me that came out of that research was that people who were in the top quartile, as in the top 25% of performers, were 2.5 times more likely to say that their mental health was very good or excellent. So I won't say correlation, but I will say connection between performing as a salesperson and experiencing better mental health as a salesperson. So with that in mind, I asked my good friend, my crazy friend who I love to death, who actually comes and spends time in the office with me and lives just down the road here on the Gold Coast, Luke Mathers, to come in and talk about this. Now, Luke is the author of Stress Teflon. He is an expert in this field, globally speaking, on this topic around fundamentally how to turn stress into an ally of performance rather than an enemy of performance. And I think that's a really important, concept to get your head around, because as I mentioned this morning in my feed, most people have a really poor relationship with stress. Now, I see stress as a fantastic thing. It's what builds muscle. It's what builds relationships. It's what builds financial power. It's what builds so many things. And without stress, I don't believe that those things get built in a way that's really sustainable. So I have a pretty weird relationship with stress. Unfortunately, I don't think the world shares my crazy views. And so I invited another amazing person who actually can talk about the science and the strategy and how he's practiced this both as a director of Specsavers, where they had to open up 100 stores in 100 days. So if you want to think stress, that's pretty stressful. As someone who coaches CEOs and business owners to help their people and themselves operate more effectively with stress, and as someone who's going around the globe speaking to companies about how they're dealing with stress. So welcome, Luke. Thanks so much for coming on board.
Good to see you, Dana. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Let's start. I am going to make sure that we talk about what you learned from Lobsters, but we'll get to that towards the end. I like the octopus show, so I think I'm going to like the lobster story. What is stress? Because I'm going to say, I'll never forget my 13-year-old daughter, and that's 18 years ago, saying, I'm so stressed. I don't know what to wear to this shop or my friend's house. And I remember in that moment thinking a couple of things. One, honey, that's not stress. Stress is not being able to feed your family. Stress is not having a roof over your head. And that's an old school view. But I also thought to myself, wow, I don't remember anybody ever talking about or mentioning things as stressful when I was a kid. And
no, it wasn't something that happened back then, was it? Well, no. Stress is basically your body's reaction to something going on. It's something that causes a reaction. It causes motion. The word emotion is just energy in motion. All right. And that's what stress does. Stress puts our energy in motion. And I've gone down rabbit holes of this stuff, and I love stress, and I love the way it works and how to actually harness it and use it as an ally, like you said before, rather than an enemy. And I think we can learn a lot from cavemen. I've just been for years and years now, I've been in a rabbit hole of cavemen. I think we do stuff because cavemen did stuff, all right? And our biology hasn't changed. In the last 10,000 years, we haven't really changed much. We've got a little bit taller, we've got a little bit bigger, but our brains are a similar size.
I didn't get taller.
You didn't, but a lot of it, as a society, we've gotten bigger. But we haven't really changed. Our biology's still ruled by things that kept us alive when there were saber-toothed tigers running around. And the hassle is that hardware that we've got in there that controls our stress responses is now reacting to things like Instagram likes, and it's now reacting to things like what dress should I wear to this party, and where that sort of thing has hijacked a system that's designed to keep us away from tigers and help us find food. And
So how
I
should a
think
leader define what stress is? Because I think a lot of leaders out there would be going, well, how do I know whether someone's actually under stress so that I can apply the right coaching principles? And are there different levels of stress? And is there some stress I should be coaching and some that I should leave to psychological practitioners? Like, where's the line for a leader?
It's a really hard line, that where do I have to tap out and find someone professional? That's a really difficult, and that's probably a webinar all on its own. But to be able to understand, I think all of it comes down to awareness. That if you're going to be aware of when your brain's not actually functioning right. Can I go down a little rabbit hole early on? Can we nerd out early? Is that cool?
Well, it was always going to happen.
Wasn't it? Our brains are kind of like an onion. We've gone on in layers over hundreds and thousands of millions of years. Our brains have gone on in layers. And we can talk about things like amygdalas and hypothalamuses and hippocampuses and all of these nerdy things, which we're not going to. We're just going to split it up for today in terms of old brain and new brain. And your old brain is that reactive part of your body. If you have you ever done this, Dean, where you've gone to step out on a road and you've kind of jumped back and you've been all startled and all of a sudden a bus has just whizzed by right in front of you? You didn't even see it, but you jump back. Those reactions, it's quick, it's fast, it's not nuanced, it's off and on, it's fight or flight, boom, let's go. That's all run by the old brain. And the old brain sits at the top of your spinal cord and it's really reactive. It's black or white, it's on or off. All right. We've all got one of them. We need one of them. Otherwise we get hit by buses. All right.
Yeah.
The thing that's uniquely human is we have this new brain, and the new brain's great. It's the prefrontal cortex that sits on the top. It's the last thing that's developed, both evolutionary and as humans, as we've grown up. It's the last thing that develops in kids. And the reason is that you want that to develop really slowly so it can adapt to its environment. All right. If kids were born with preformed prefrontal cortexes, one, mum wouldn't be too happy because your head would be too big. But it also, it wouldn't have given us a chance to adapt to our environment. So it's a really adaptive part of our brain. And so what we've got to make sure is we have the fight or flight old brain and the prefrontal cortex, which is the logical new brain. We have those two together. And I think when you talk about how do we recognize when someone's really under stress and stress isn't doing them any favors anymore, I think that's when that new brain comes missing.
So you mentioned the word
logic.
Yeah, you mentioned the word reactive, and I've got to say that, look, when you're dodging a bus, reactive is fantastic, but generally in terms of coaching other people, reactive is, in my experience, not a great place for a lot of people to be. Like, what are you seeing out there in terms of the way that plays out for the managers that you're coaching?
It's really simple.
I'm using this one.
Yeah, well, when you are reactive, the two things you're going to be defensive. All right, you're always going to be trying to make sure that you're safe, because your brain doesn't care whether you're happy or not. All it does is cares whether you're safe. All right, so your old brain only cares whether you're safe. So you're going to be defensive and you're going to be dumb, because when you're being reactive, you haven't had time for that smart part that can do the logic. Yeah, I'm a child of the 80s. And I'm a big fan of Back to the Future, Marty McFly and the flux capacitor, and I've got one of these sitting on the bench behind me. It's the car from Back to the Future. And our new brain's a bit like that. Our new brain can wander into the past, it can wander forward to the future, and it's a simulation machine. It can see all the different possibilities that can go on here. When we're reactive, we only have one possibility, the reactive one. So that part of our brain that can get in the time machine and wander back and forth has gone missing. All right. So we can't plan very well for the future when we're being reactive.
So you mentioned that all the old brain cares about is being safe. Do you think that safety now includes being right or not being wrong, or to tell me about that? It's really interesting.
Yeah, well, it's a really good point, because one of the things about it is we go towards the things that feel good and away from things that feel bad. And being told you're wrong, being told you're not good enough, all of those sort of things feel really bad. So our old brain doesn't like them; it wants to get away from them. And our old brain is very much about that sort of stuff. So we do like to defend our ego, if you like, and our old brain will actually even do that.
So then I guess as a coach, it's interesting. One, you've got to recognize that you might be coaching somebody who's in an old brain state. But let's take a step back and go, well, what if the coach is in an old brain state? Well, how does that play out?
Yeah, that plays out. One of the keynotes I do is called Elephants and Baboons, the biology of leadership. All right. And In this talk, we talk about the different ways different animals in nature actually deal with stress. And a guy called Robert Sapolsky from Stanford did a great study looking at baboons, and he looked at what happened when a high-ranking male got picked on by the alpha. And the alpha's the big dog, he can't be beaten by anything. If the alpha picks on a high-ranking male, his stress hormone, that high-ranking male's stress hormones go through the roof. What do you reckon his first response is to that?
So we just translate this first to the organizations we're talking to. So if the CEO comes down and talks to the head of sales and has the crack at it, I would imagine the response is, I don't know, defensive, or maybe go hide in a corner, or what is it?
Well, basically, what they discovered from this is the fastest way you can get your stress hormones to come down, because stress hormones make you feel agitated. The fastest way you can get rid of that and get comfortable is to pick on someone lower down the food chain.
Ooh.
And that's exactly what they noticed with baboons. Baboons will straight away, if he gets picked on by the alpha, he'll go and pick on someone else. And you see this panning out all the time in businesses, that someone gets something from above that causes a lot of stress, and one of their instinctive reactions, remember the old brain's very reactive, is that they then send that down the line and go and pick on, chew someone else down further down the line, who then chews someone else down further down the line, and eventually the cleaner goes home and kicks the dog.
Well, in our world, the salesperson goes home and drinks a carton of beer or smashes 2 bottles of Chardonnay.
Does whatever they have to do to actually feel comfortable. All right. So what we've got to be able to do is come up with some tools, and I'd love to talk about some of those today. Some of those tools that can actually help us find the fact that we've just been triggered by something, and use that instead of being a trigger. Because if we pull the trigger on a gun, we don't have any control over where that bullet goes. So we want to cause those triggers for stress. We want to turn them into cues to get curious and actually get deliberate about what our next step is. And if we can do that, we're not like baboons, and we don't send the stress further down the line.
So if we relate this quickly back before we talk about tools, we relate this back, the simple reality is, and I see this in so many organizations, the C-suite says, I don't like what's on the profit and loss, or I don't like what's on the revenue sheet. Go and get me those sales. And it's like, they don't want to hear, but look, we're spending 30% less on marketing. They don't want to hear, but you just made me sack 10% of my sales force. They don't want to hear any of that. They've just, seriously, it's almost sociopathic. Just go and get me the sales. And then often the head of sales, well, if the head of sales responds with that part of their brain, then they turn into the baboon and they come down to their sales managers, smack them around because it makes them feel good. They don't know why they do it, but it makes them feel good. Then the sales manager, if they're in that reactive brain, bang, they're going to smack the salespeople, and we end up with the sorts of numbers we were talking about before. So how do we break that cycle?
Yeah, we break that cycle by connecting those two brains. We've got to make sure that our reactive brain and our logical brain that can look into the future and simulate different responses, that we put those two back together. So it comes down to just a moment of pause to be able to stop and sort of say, okay, I've just been triggered here. That part of my brain's going missing. How do we get it back on?
How do you know if you're triggered? How do you know? What do you tell people to do?
Yeah, we came up with one of the books I wrote. I wrote with a teenager, funnily enough. We lost a friend of my daughter's to suicide. It's a long story, which I won't go into today, but she was really struggling, and her and I wrote a book together, and she got all of my nerdy stuff and turned it into something that was actually simple and everyone could digest. And she actually came up with a 3-step plan that I've been using ever since. My family uses it, and I teach it all around the country and all around the place. And it's called Catch, Wait, and Reset. And Catch, Wait, and Reset has just been such a godsend, because it's basically 3 steps, really easy: catch, wait, and reset. And the beauty of this is that once you actually get this, it's your way to get your brains back together. And the way it works is, the catch part is to catch the physical signs that you're feeling stressed, to be aware of what those are.
Yeah.
Right? I get knots in my stomach. I know that when something's stressing me, I'm going to get a knot in my stomach. And that used to be, oh no, I'm stressed, I'm frazzled. And I've now turned that into my cue to get curious. I'm noticing I'm getting knots in my stomach. What's going on with that? And that's the catch part. What would yours be, Dino? What would your sign that you're feeling stressed be?
There's a couple of things, I think. And one that I've noticed is I just scroll for that extra minute longer if I'm looking at LinkedIn or Instagram or something. I'm like, I'm avoiding the world, doing something that's purposeless. And that's normally a sign to me that I'm stressed about something I know I need to do. The other one,
it's really good awareness. Most people don't know that one. Most people wouldn't put those two together.
The other one is if you're working with me and I put my hands on my face or my head. That's a pretty strong sign that I just
rubbing his head
on the fart. And it's interesting because my stress response tends to be anger. I'm definitely in that baboon brain.
Well, fight or flight's real. I'm a fighter. I'm going to hide. So you're a fighter. So you're going to come out swinging.
I'm not a Kardashian. I don't take it out on inanimate objects and start smashing things up or tipping drinks on people. I'm never going to be on those housewife shows. But definitely those are probably some triggers. And the other one is tight jaw.
Discouraged.
Really tight jaw from grinding at night or worrying about stuff that I shouldn't be worried about.
I'd love everyone who's listening to just throw in the chat what they think theirs might be. It'd be interesting to see what some of these are. But knots in the stomach's a really big one. That's about 60% of people will get that. I had one dude say, I sweat through my head. So when he started getting beads of sweat on his head, he knew that he was getting. Yeah,
Sydney. Quiet. Yeah, Sydney. Yes.
Yeah, there's fight, flight, and freeze are our three stress responses, and the people who go quiet are generally more in the freeze. And it's just I'm going to pause here for a moment. And what we want to be able to do. So our idea is to go from being triggers for anxiety and triggers for stress, and that gets our brain missing, to the other side where that same thing, that Sydney going quiet or you start rubbing your head, that turns into your cue to get curious.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, the avoidance. I like that. Who else is out there? There's plenty of other people out there. Come on, and I guess this is really important because would it be fair to say, Luke, that if you don't identify what your signposts are of stress, then the probability of catching has to be much lower. Would that be fair to say?
Oh, completely. And it's a bit like, because what these emotions and these feelings are doing is they're sending you a signal. They're sending you a little flag to say, look, pay attention to this. And one of the problems with modern society is we live in a place where we've got so much of this going on all the time that it's a bit like living near an airport or living near a highway. You don't hear the cars and you don't hear the planes after a while. So to be able to stop and actually have a few just little moments of pause just to sort of say, okay, let's calm down and let's actually hear what my body's telling me. And your body's going to tell you that if you're rubbing your head or if you're feeling the knots in your stomach or you're clenching your jaw or your tongue's stuck to the roof of your mouth and your mouth's gone all dry.
Yeah.
Right? What we often find, because we do this I do stress reset workshops where we have a whole day with people, teaching them how their stress system works, teaching what their reactions are and how to change them. And one of the things that we notice is that at the start of the day, they think they know what their catch is. And then by the end of the day, they've actually found 2 or 3 that were further upstream.
Yeah.
So quite often, something before you're rubbing your head and getting frazzled and scrolling on LinkedIn, you might have had something else. It might have been the tight jaw or something like that. But that's really important. If we go back to catch, wait, and reset, is that we've got to be able to catch that thing and use it as our cue to get curious. And when we get curious, that's when we put our brains back. And that's the WAIT part of it. And the WAIT stands for what am I thinking? Okay?
But just so you understand that, when we get curious, that's when we put our brains back together. Help me understand that concept.
Well, the old brain doesn't use language, all right? The old brain doesn't have language. It's either off or it's on, all right? Have you ever met someone, and you would have met people in your life, and you think, there's something just a bit off about that dude. I don't know what it is, but something's not quite right there, and you can't put it into words. Basically, that's your old brain going, alarm bells, alarm bells. It's not articulate enough to tell you what it is, but it's telling you to beware. Yeah. All right. And because it picks up a whole bunch of triggers and cues that you're not aware of.
Yeah.
All right. So when that goes off, when we use language, that's a way to, because our language is all done with new brain. So when we use language and asking ourselves questions, Luke loves it when people ask themselves questions. But when we ask ourselves questions, what we do is we actually put that new brain back on top. So if you ask yourself, what am I thinking? All of a sudden you're going, okay, we're not reacting now. We're actually looking at the situation and we're looking at it objectively. So asking yourself questions is a really good way to put those two brains together.
So to ask the question, that can only come from here, which means by asking,
you're putting them back on.
Yep.
Yeah, you're putting them back on. And to be really curious about what's going on. I love what am I thinking? Just the fact that that says wait and just that moment of pause. All right. And when it is a really stressful situation, it's a bit like your computer when it's overloaded and you've got 20 different tabs open and everything's now shut down and nothing works anymore. That's kind of what happens with our brain when we're in a really stressful situation. And that's where the title of that book, and Reset, came from. And it's like on your computer, you go Control, Alt, Delete, and that shuts everything down and you can pull up the things that you need to. And so if we catch the physical signs, what am I thinking is the putting the brains back together. And
could you insert other questions? Could you insert other questions? Like, you know, so I tend to ask, is this really a problem, or how big a problem is this? And that tends to get me into emotionally, you know, it takes the whole heat of the situation down.
Yeah, it's a really good way to put it in perspective. Because the hassle is that our old brain's going to get run on whatever's emotional and we want to fix right now. Whereas asking those questions then says, am I going to worry about this tomorrow? Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite questions. Is this going to be a massive problem in a year's time? And 99 times out of 100, you go, probably not.
Probably not. No, probably not. And what that does is that gives you perspective, and that gets the whole of your brain working together again. And that's what we need, because one of the things about modern sales is that and you're the expert in this, but modern sales is about finding solutions. And the hassle is you can't help people find solution if the smart part of your brain's gone missing. So the only way we can do that is to actually get our smart part and our reactive brain working together. And a lot of that comes down to being able to sort of, reset our stress system and be able to get it working for us and using that energy for good.
And it's fair, because if I'm stressed about my budget, stressed about my boss, stressed about whether I'm going to keep my job, stressed about all these things, the probability of me doing any intelligent thinking is zero, because I'm just in old brain, right? And so I guess the role of the coach, the leader, is to come in and ask that or catch the fact that the person's stressed, help them ask a better question, and then move them into reset mode. And so reset was, just to go through that one, Control, Alt, Delete.
Control, Alt, Delete. And none of this is new. All right. Epictetus talked about waste no time worrying about things you can't control 2,500 years ago. So it's been around for a long, long time. But control, what can I control? All right. And waste no time worrying about the stuff we can't.
So we know, look, and it's funny, and I'm sure I read that in some scriptures before I read it in Covey, at a very, very young age, and the concept of controllables and what's influence, what can I influence and just don't care about the other stuff, has always been core to me. But why do you think most people, even though we know it, we don't do it, right? Like,
yeah. Well, that's where the catching the weight part of it comes from, because we're not going to do it while we're in an old brain shitstorm. Okay. Right? While the stress system is going overloaded, we don't think about those things, because the part of our brain that can do that isn't there. All right, and that's why
the role of the coach, though, right? So the role of the coach is to get us back into that space and help us think that way.
Get them back on,
and so
to give you the tools to do that as well. And by asking yourself, what can I control in this environment? What are my alternatives? The alt part, there's always a couple of ways we can go. But we only go to the default defensive way to start off with. But once we stop and talk to ourselves, then we have alternatives. All right. And the delete is what do we need to delete? What self-talk do we need to get rid of? What are the things that actually aren't serving us here? All right. Yeah. And when we can do that, it's a bit like the serenity prayer, which they use a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And you can't get that sort of serenity if you're in an old brain shitstorm and you're stressed off your nut. So you've got to be able to sort of, get your biology working in your favor. So the smart part of your brain that's taken millions of years to evolve is actually in the game and helping you out. And whether that's making more sales, or whether that's being a better wife or a husband or father, all of those things are just as important. But we can't do that when our old brain's running the show and our new brain's gone missing.
So you also, I think in another conversation we had, you were talking about the difference between the way you frame a situation, as in whether it's a challenge or a threat, and the impact that has on the brain and the chemistry and your stress response. Can you talk through that a little?
One of the key things we talk about in Stress Teflon is a thing called the fork in the stress road. And you'll be cruising along, and at some stage, something stressful is going to happen. And our default response is always threat. All right. Your brain's shitty first draft is always threat. And that kind of makes sense because you want to be able to make sure if it is a threat, you're ready for it.
So my boss says you're not on budget. My default is this is a threat.
Oh my God, I'm going to get sacked. It's a threat. Absolutely.
Right. So a customer won't return your call. Automatic response. Threat.
And think of the bullshit stories you tell yourself in that situation.
Yeah. Somebody asks a tough question in a presentation. Default.
They don't like me. They don't like our thing. They're not going to buy.
Yeah.
We straight away default to threat. And that makes sense if we're in the jungle and there's a rustle in the bush over on the corner. All right. It might be a rabbit that we might be able to hunt and have for dinner, or it might be a tiger. If we get it wrong and it's a rabbit, we might miss out. If we get it wrong and it's a tiger, we're dead. So it makes sense that we default to the bad stuff because we've got to make sure it's not the bad stuff so it doesn't kill us. All right. Yeah. But that's our brain's first shitty draft. We don't have to take that one. All right. So that's where catch, wait, and reset works, to actually catch yourself at the fork in the stress road. And instead of going down to where it's a threat, to take it up to where it's a challenge. And when it goes up to a challenge, you put your brain back together, you ask yourself better questions, and you come up with responses that are actually going to help.
So you're probably having quite a few conversations about this, and this is becoming very, very topical around the concept of psychological safety at work. Yes. And I guess my concern is that could get interpreted to, therefore, work should not be stressful. And my limited understanding is that means that if we take away the stress, then we take away a significant element of the learning. What's the connection between all of that? Like what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of landmines in this, but it's not as difficult as it looks. States all around the country, and I think the federal government's even mandated this, that we have to create workspaces that are psychologically safe. All right, it's legislated against. It's something we need to be able to do. That doesn't mean that we have to have stress-free work zones. All right, that's not what that's about. Stress is going to happen. It's going to happen no matter what. That doesn't mean you're not psychologically safe. For something to become a mental illness and turn it into something that's bad, it has to have three things. It's got to have impact, right? It's got to have intensity, and it's got to have duration. All right. So you might have a really stressful thing happen that impacted me a lot, but it only lasted for 20 minutes and then it was all okay. Right. That's not gonna cause mental health problems. That's not the sort of psychological safety we're talking about. What we're talking about is people are being overloaded. People are feeling unsafe. People are having these problems thrown on them for months and months and months on end with no reprieve. Then it becomes something that's not psychologically safe. So it's intensity, impact, and duration. So we've got to make sure we're aware of all three of those. And if it means we have a real, say you might have a conference and you're going to sell your butt off, you've got to stand at some conference somewhere and you're going to work your butt off and you're going to do 14-hour days those days. That's okay. But then you've got to make sure you reset properly and be able to have a break afterwards and stuff like that. So you don't want to have it going for months and months on end. Then it becomes something that's not psychologically safe. And that's something that can lead to mental illness and things like that down the track. So intensity, impact, and duration are the three things we've got to look at when it comes to psychological safety. Yeah.
And what about in the context of, I guess, sales, where, you've got monthly budgets, quarterly budgets, annual budgets? Surely we're running the risk of stepping over the line there, where we're saying to somebody, you've got a quarter of 90 days to get back on track. I mean, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. But what we've also got, a part of the psychological safety stuff too, is we've got to ensure people have the tools to do what they need to do. All right. And so if you're putting these perhaps unrealistic sales targets on them to people that don't have the skills to do that, then as a sales manager, that's your job. Your job is to actually work out what those skills that are needed are and help those people get them.
So we've talked a lot about awareness, I guess, at the core of becoming aware of what's going on, becoming aware of what your response could or should be, becoming aware of whether you're here or there. You also talk a lot about belonging and contribution as, I won't say solutions to stress, but as elements of making it an ally rather than an enemy. Can you maybe share a little bit of those thoughts with the group?
Yeah, well, I have three foundations for stress Teflon, what we need to make stress not stick. And it's not an absence of stress. Remember, we want to have some stress because it fires us up, it gets stuff done. Stress is actually a good thing, all right? But we've got to have awareness of when we're getting overloaded. We've got to have awareness of what our reactions are, and we've got to have awareness of when the things we're doing aren't serving us anymore, all right? So awareness is really key. And I think I think everything starts with awareness. Any change we want to have. I think there's 3 steps to that. It's like awareness, options, and actions. That you've got to be able to have awareness first. Otherwise, nothing changes. Nothing gets better. Nothing improves. All right. So awareness is really cool. One of the real key ones with awareness too is self-talk. All right. Yeah. I'd love your take on this actually, Dino. How much self-talk kills sales?
Well, it's not just self-talk, it's peer talk as well. Okay. So it's self-talk, oh, well, I'm not good enough, or they don't care, or all clients are terrible, or people don't respect me, or, a lot of the self-talk is extremely destructive, but unfortunately it's often perpetuated or shared with others in the team. So people don't just destroy their own mental well-being and productivity with their self-talk, they then go out and want to share it with everybody else.
Spread it. Yeah, okay.
And I really believe that it's part of a leader's role is to manage that situation internally and and I'm not saying create a police state where you can't say anything bad, but pay real attention to the conversations that are going on, because conversations people are having with themselves, because you can spot those, can't you? And you can hear it in their language. Okay. This place is crap, they're never going to get this fixed, et cetera, et cetera. But also those cooler conversations around, the product team doesn't know what they're doing, marketing's leads are horrible, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's really important that a sales leader pays attention to that and changes the conversation to what people can control and influence. One of the things we do in our stress reset programs that we run with companies, and these are a really good sort of self-awareness exercise. We come up with it. We do a thing called Finding Carlos, and it's a bit like Homer here. We all have a little devil sitting on one shoulder, and we all have an angel sitting on the other one. I've got an angel and an angel, mate. Yeah, you would. All right. But the hassle with both those Homers sitting on either shoulder, they actually sound really, really similar. All right. And the voice that you hear in your head, we all have an internal narrator that's telling us stuff. A lot of it's repetitive, a lot of it's stressful, a lot of it's negative. All right. But what we've got to understand is when the devil's talking to us and when the angel's talking to us. And once we get clear on that, we can sort of cut through the noise a little bit. We've all heard of imposter syndrome, and I'm sure we've all felt it at some stage or another. I have little Luke who sits over my shoulder here, and he's always over my left shoulder, and he tells me I can't do things. Why would someone want to read a book you wrote? Why would you come on a webinar with the legendary Dean Mannix? All right. Who would want to listen to you? And then I have Carlos, who's the better version of me, who sits on the other shoulder. And Carlos is the world's most amazing man. He's fantastic. I can do anything when Carlos is talking to me. So to be able to understand that awareness, to know which one of those two is talking, and we go through a really good process of coming up with the characteristics of each of them. And once we know that, we actually have that awareness, and our self-talk then becomes something that doesn't cause a lot of our stress. And so that's the first one, that awareness. The second one that we need to make stress not stick to us is we've got to have belonging. All right. We've got to feel like we have people around us who we love. They love us back. They have our back, and we're safe. Because you've got to remember, I know I'm harping on about cavemen, but we've got really small claws. We've got really little teeth, soft skin, and we don't run real fast. All right. If we're out in the jungle with big animals and leopards and stuff, we're toast. The only reason humans have survived is because we've survived in tribes. We survive in groups. We have people around us. All right. So we've got to feel like we belong. And belonging is a word that can be misconstrued a little bit. Brené Brown makes a really great distinction when she talks about this stuff. She talks about the difference between fitting in and belonging. And the way she puts it is, when we fit in, we change ourselves to fit in with the group. When we belong, the group accepts us how we are. All right. And I love that concept, that we've got to be able to belong. We've got to be able to be who we are in a group and be accepted for that. And that's a big part of it. And as leaders, it's your job to help people belong. All right. Yeah, I think in sales, before you get to the next one, I think in the sales space, it's really interesting because leaders, as sales managers, have struggled even pre-COVID with making salespeople feel like they belong. They have this ritual of the sales meeting, which is fascinating. We did some research with 1,500 odd responses to sales meetings, and 69% of sales leaders told us that they were using the sales meeting as one of their core motivational strategies for the week. And 57% of salespeople in those sales meetings told us that it was demotivating them each week. Yeah, right. So this is pre-COVID. This is pre-COVID. Okay. And it's interesting because I think in the new hybrid work environment where the salesperson is more likely to be out of the office for extended periods of time, if sales leaders haven't radically changed up their game in terms of thinking about how they can make each and every person feel like they belong to something and each and every individual feel like they belong to a team, if they haven't changed up their game dramatically, I would suggest there's a real lack of belonging, which once again probably leads to significantly more stress.
Yeah, it does. And one of the things is that you've got to care, and you show you care. All right. If you're not showing your teams that you care about them, not only their sales, but them as humans and things like that, particularly as we get some of the younger generations coming through, that they need to know that they're cared about, and they need to know that you care about them as humans, not just whether they can get you the sales or not. And that's part of that belonging. And it actually leads in really well to the last one, that one of the greatest stress relievers we have is contribution. So there's kind of an ABC to stress Teflon. It's awareness, belonging, and contribution. All right. And the last one's really important, because one of the things that we have a tendency to do is we take notice of the bad stuff and we can ruminate on that. It can my wife calls it renting a room in your head for free. So we can ruminate on bad stuff.
I like that concept.
But one of the things we can do really easily is we might do a really good sale and go, yeah, cool, that was great, move on, what's next? No, let's just pause for a minute, and let's just pause and say, yeah, that went really well. I think that's really going to help them with what they've bought here. I think it's really going to suit their business. I think it's really good for our sales thing. And to actually take notice of the fact that we've done something that's a contribution, because we get a little dopamine here. If we want to nerd out on things like neurochemicals again, we've all heard of dopamine, and it's our sort of drive to thrive hormone. It's the thing that sort of keeps us on track. And there's a opposite reaction between stress hormones and dopamine. When we get dopamine, our stress hormone, they buffer our stress hormones. So when we're getting really stressed, one of the best ways to relieve stress is to do something good, all right? To do something, to achieve something, to get a sale, to tick something off a box. And that actually decreases our stress hormones as well. So that's why contribution is a really big part of being stress Teflon, because as we actually achieve something, our stress levels go down.
So look, it's interesting because this linked back into another finding from that Sales Health Alliance report, which was that salespeople were 4 times more likely to be suffering mental health issues if they saw their role as a job rather than a calling.
Yeah, so, that's huge.
If you're interpreting your role as I'm just doing a job versus, hey, what I'm doing is contributing, then 4 times more likely to be in a poor state of mental health. And that was a pretty significant stat for me. There's a great word in Greek called eudaimonia, or we call it eudaimonia in the West. And it's kind of where the junction of all of them. This is the original stuff from Stress Teflon. So to have the safety of a tribe, pride from contribution, and honest self-awareness, to have the 3 of those together, that's when we become Stress Teflon. And what I talked about in the book is that's where we get eudaimonia. And eudaimonia is that feeling really good about me because I'm contributing to the world, I'm doing good things, I'm reliable, I'm a good human, and I like being me. And I think when you have that, stress doesn't stick anymore. Yeah. And that's kind of what you're talking about when it's something that is of a higher purpose. We all need to have a little bit of purpose in our world and that sort of stuff. And when you're doing something sales for the sake of sales, it probably doesn't do that. But if you can find what the higher order sort of good that comes out of this, then that buffers our stress and stops us stressing so much. And that's when we get that sort of next level feeling good about ourselves, which happens when we get eudaimonia. Look, I might just quickly sum up a couple of key things that have stood out for me around this. Look, I think the first one is that as sales leaders, the bottom line is that our salespeople are facing a more stressful environment, and that stress is impacting performance. And the data that's coming through is suggesting that fundamentally there is a correlation between how much stress people are experiencing and whether they're performing or not. And definitely, in terms of where the world's going, part of our role is now the mental health and well-being of our salespeople, and at the very least, their psychological safety. So we can't ignore this as sales managers. We have to step into this space. Luke's provided a couple of good frameworks there. Number 1, catch weight and reset. So as a sales leader, 1, only the strong can help the weak. And I don't mean to call people under stress weak, but if you take it that way, I hope you don't. But the bottom line is, as a sales leader, you need to pay attention to how can you catch yourself being stressed so that you're not managing like this, you're actually managing like this. How can you be more effective in playing that weight game, as in what am I thinking and running the scenarios before you react? So don't react. Coach. They're 2 different things. And then from a reset perspective, how can you control, alt, delete for yourself? But more importantly, I'd suggest how can you do the same for your people? How can you make sure that you're out there with your people, and when you're spotting stress and paying attention and looking for it, that you can help people catch the fact that they're not in a great space, help them fundamentally ask a better question to get this part of the brain into operation, and help them reset. These are really, really important concepts. How do we, as an organization and as a culture, enable ourselves and our people to manage stress more effectively and to treat it as an ally rather than an enemy? I think those three key concepts there from Luke in terms of how do we generate more awareness now is a really simple suggestion. And I'm not selling Luke's book here, but if you want a fast and cheap way to do that, buy a bunch of Luke's Stress Teflon books, share it around with the sales team, and go through a chapter a week. That's real easy to do. More importantly, I'd suggest is how do you create that belonging within the sales team? And that comes from you as the leader. You have to be out there actively generating a really strong sense of belonging within the team. And then how do you get people to experience contribution, the contribution of their role, the contribution to one another, the contribution of your product and solution to other people? If you're not discussing that and engaging your people around that and stopping and pausing when successes happen, then you're probably not triggering that off and building up a much more productive approach to the stresses that your people face. So those are some of the key things that really came away from me. Luke, I might ask you just to close out with, what was it that you learned from Lobsters that we can all take on board in relation to making stress not our enemy?
Yeah, my daughter's a massive Friends fan. So we were watching Friends one day, and there was a scene where Phoebe said that Ross and Rachel were each other's lobster, that they mate for life and they walk around the cage holding claws. And I'm thinking, a lobster's a 30 million year old species. It's been around a long, long time. I'm not sure they're monogamous and they mate for life. So the nerd in me came rushing to the surface, and Phoebe's not my go-to science person. So I thought, okay, I'll have a look into this. And it turns out lobsters don't mate for life. A female lobster can throw her tail around wherever she likes, and she can actually store sperm of lobsters for up to a month of lots and lots of different fathers until she's ready to ovulate, and then pumps out a whole bunch of eggs.
I'm now wondering whether I should have asked this.
We digress a little bit. But what I discovered was something that happens with lobsters is they have an exoskeleton. They have a skeleton on the outside of their body, and their bodies, they never stop growing. All right. A lobster will keep growing its entire life. And what happens is it gets to a point where there's too much meat inside this exoskeleton, and it's pushing on the outside. It's pushing on the inside, and it's uncomfortable. It's stressful. All right. It can't move quite so well anymore. It's got discomfort. What it does, it then goes somewhere safe. So safety of a tribe, all right? It goes somewhere safe and it busts off that shell and it stays somewhere safe. It sucks in a whole bunch of water and makes itself bigger, all right? And then it stays in the safe spot while the shell grows back, and it has the same spikes and the same spots as the old one. It then releases all the water, and it's got room to grow inside its brand new shell, all right? And it just it looks the same spots, same spikes. It's just a bigger, better lobster. But none of that would have happened if it hadn't have felt that stress, hadn't have felt that discomfort to go off, cast the shell off, try something new, try something difficult, be vulnerable, be under some pressure and some stress. And that's how we come out as bigger, better lobsters. And I think that's a real key point for me, that we don't grow without some stress. We've got to be able to embrace it. And we've got to be able to take the negative connotation off stress and use it as a challenge. And I think if we can do that, then stress isn't going to stick anymore.
Nice. Really nice. Thank you so much, Luke. I guess just to close out, stress doesn't have to be the villain. And the bottom line is each and every one of you as sales managers can and should be actively approaching stress as the hero of the situation and just helping your people by coaching them through these stressful moments so that they can grow and come out the other side better. Luke, thank you so much. Where can people find you, Luke?
LinkedIn, just type in Luke Mathers speaker into LinkedIn and you'll find me there. Or lukemathers.com.au. And there's some free books on there you can download and a whole bunch of things, and things about doing keynotes and stress resets for your teams. And I'd love to come and talk to anyone that wants to have me. So thanks for having me, Dino. I really appreciate it. Good to chat.
Absolute pleasure. And thanks so much for your time. I'm sure it's been very helpful for a lot of people. Take care, mate. Bye now. See you, everyone. Mate. Thank you so much. Bye now.